It all started with a dare, a stupid, foolish dare. My friend Liam held up the bright red box of Uno cards, his eyes gleaming in the dim glow of the streetlights. "I dare you," he said, his voice a low whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. "I dare all of you. One game of Uno, inside the old Blackwood house." My other friends, Maya and Chloe, exchanged nervous glances. Everyone in town knew about the Blackwood house. It had been empty for as long as anyone could remember, a dark shape looming at the end of Whispering Lane. They said it was haunted. They said no one who went in ever came out quite the same. Of course I said yes. How could I not? I didn't want Liam to call me a chicken for the rest of the summer. "Fine," I managed to say, my own voice sounding braver than I felt. "But if a ghost steals my draw 4 card, I'm blaming you." Chloe forced a laugh, but it sounded shaky and weak. Maya just hugged her arms tightly, her gaze fixed on the dark, skeletal trees that lined the path to the house. The air grew colder as we started walking, the familiar sounds of our neighborhood fading away behind us. We were leaving the world of the living and stepping into a story, a scary story. And we were the main characters. We stood before it, a hulking silhouette against the moonless sky. The Blackwood house. Its windows were like vacant eyes, staring out into the darkness. Paint peeled from the walls like sunburnt skin, and a broken porch swing creaked back and forth, moved by a wind we couldn't feel. Liam pushed open the rusty iron gate. It shrieked in protest, a sound that seemed to echo for miles. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around, to run back to the safety of my warm bed, but I couldn't. I was trapped by the dare. Liam clicked on his flashlight, cutting a shaky beam through the oppressive darkness of the foyer. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny, frantic insects. An old grandfather clock stood silent in the corner, its hands frozen at midnight. A thick, musty smell filled the air, the scent of decay and forgotten things. "See? Nothing to be afraid of," Liam said, but his voice echoed strangely in the vast empty space. We found an old dusty table in the center of what must have been a living room. This was it. This was where we would play. We sat down, the legs of our chairs scraping loudly against the floorboards, and the game began. The house was even creepier on the inside. Shadows stretched and twisted in the corners of our flashlight beams, making ordinary shapes look like looming monsters. A grand staircase swept upwards into a darkness so complete it felt like it could swallow you whole. Portraits with faded watching eyes lined the walls, their painted smiles looking more like sneers in the flickering light. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind whistling through a broken pane of glass sounded like a footstep or a whisper. The silence in between the noises was somehow worse. It was a heavy, listening silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for us. We started the game. I dealt the cards, my hands trembling so much that I almost dropped them. The colourful cards looked strangely out of place in the gloom of the ancient house. "My turn!" Chloe announced, trying to sound cheerful. She placed a blue 7 on the small pile we had made. The sound of the card hitting the table was unnervously loud. We tried to make jokes, to laugh and pretend we were just hanging out in someone's basement. But our laughter sounded hollow, and it died quickly, swallowed by the immense quiet of the house. We were all on edge, our eyes darting around the room at every little sound. That's when the first strange thing happened. A cold draft snaked its way through the room, extinguishing Maya's flashlight and plunging her into darkness. She gasped, fumbling to turn it back on. "It's just the wind," Liam said, but there were no open windows nearby. The air became icy, raising goosebumps on my arms. I looked down at my hand. A moment ago, I was sure I had a red 3, but now a black wild card was sitting there instead. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But I knew what I had seen. The card had changed. The game continued, but the fun was gone. Now it was a challenge, a test of our courage. A floorboard creaked on the floor above us. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like heavy footsteps pacing back and forth. "Did you hear that?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. We all froze, listening. The footsteps stopped directly over our heads. A long, drawn-out scratching sound started, like fingernails being dragged slowly across the wooden floor. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were all thinking the same thing. We weren't alone in the house. Something was up there, and it knew we were here. The scratching sound from upstairs finally stopped, leaving us in a silence that felt even more terrifying. Liam tried to break the tension. "Okay, my go," he said, his voice cracking. He reached for his cards, but then he froze. His eyes were wide, staring at the wall behind me. "What is it?" I asked, afraid to turn around. "The shadow," he stammered. It moved." We all turned our flashlights to the wall. At first, I saw nothing but our own elongated, distorted shadows. But then I saw it. One of the shadows, one that didn't belong to any of us, detached itself from the wall. It slithered across the floor like a pool of ink before melting back into the darkness. We should have run then. We should have screamed and bolted out the door and never looked back. But we were frozen, paralyzed by a fear so cold and so deep it felt like our feet were glued to the floor. The game had a strange hold on us. It was as if we had to finish it, as if something in the house wouldn't let us leave until we did. Chloe played a skip card, her hand shaking violently. As soon as the card touched the pile, the flame on a nearby candle holder, one that had been unlit, suddenly flickered to life, casting eerie, dancing light around the room. My turn. I looked down at my hand. The cards seemed to be changing colours right before my eyes. A yellow card would shimmer and turn green. A draw 2 would suddenly become a reverse. It was impossible. It defied all logic, but it was happening. I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, so close it felt like someone was leaning over my shoulder, watching my every move. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing there, just empty, dark air. But the feeling remained. The feeling of being watched by unseen eyes, hungry and cold. It was Maya's turn. She had only one card left. "Uno," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her last card was a wild draw 4. She looked at Liam, her eyes pleading with him, as if asking for permission to end the game. Before she could play it, the grandfather clock in the corner chimed. Bong. It was a single, deafening chime that vibrated through the entire house. We all jumped. The clock's hands were still frozen at midnight. It shouldn't have been able to make a sound, but it did. And with that single, soul-shaking chime, we all knew that the game was almost over, and so was our luck. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a terrifying energy. The house was no longer just watching, it was playing. Maya's hand hovered over the pile, the wild draw 4 card pinched between her fingers. "Just play it!" Liam urged, his voice frantic. "Let's just finish and get out of here!" The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, pressing in on us from all sides. The flame on the candle flickered wildly, casting our terrified faces in a ghoulish orange glow. The scratching sound started again, but this time it wasn't upstairs. It was coming from under our table. Scratch, scrape, scratch. With a choked sob, Maya slammed the card down onto the pile. "Uno, out!" she cried. For a single, breathless moment, nothing happened. There was only the sound of our own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of our hearts. Maybe it was over, maybe we had won. But then, the deck of cards in the centre of the table began to levitate. It floated an inch into the air, then 2, the cards fluttering as if caught in a whirlwind. They began to spin faster and faster, forming a vortex of red, yellow, green and blue right before our eyes. Then they exploded outwards. The cards shot in every direction like shrapnel. But they weren't just cards anymore. As they flew past our faces, they transformed into hideous, screaming faces, their mouths open in silent agony. The lights from our flashlights died all at once, plunging us into absolute terrifying blackness. A voice, ancient and full of rage, echoed from the walls around us. It wasn't a human voice. It was a guttural, terrifying roar that spoke one word: mine. That was it. That was the last straw. We didn't need to say anything. We all scrambled backwards from the table, our chairs crashing to the floor. We ran blindly through the darkness, bumping into walls and each other, our screams tearing through the suffocating silence. We could feel cold spots brushing against us, hear whispers hissing in our ears. We finally burst through the front door and out into the night, not stopping until the rusty gate of the Blackwood house was far behind us. We ran and ran, leaving the game, the cards, and whatever was inside that house behind. But as we fled down Whispering Lane, a chilling question lingered in my mind. Just because we left the house, did that mean the house was finished playing with us?